Welcome to Season 4 of Under the Sisterhood, Women's March for Mental Wellness. This season, we're diving deep into the intersection of women's mental health and overall wellness, bringing you thought-provoking conversations every Friday. We'll explore a wide range of topics, including how mental health impacts every stage of a woman's life, the intricate connections between physical and emotional well-being, and the role of practitioners who champion mental wellness. This podcast celebrates women, their resilience, and the incredible contributions they make to our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today, we're getting under the hood of Sidnee Peck, a daughter, sister, women's advocate, and a fractional COO for multiple startup companies in FemTech, healthcare, and housing and community development. She is a multi-time founder in healthcare and housing. Sidnee is the founder of Heirloom Collective, a non-profit creating intergenerational communities, co-founder of FemTechAZ, as well as Lab to Life Venture Studios in Fort Collins, Colorado. Peck previously served as an executive for a mid-stage startup, Source Global, PBC, an Arizona renewable technology firm driving deployment to over 50 countries. She serves on the board of yesAZ, a startup community nonprofit, HCCI, a home-based primary care nonprofit, and Alaris, a technology company she helped to co-found. She is the former CEO of Smart Brain Aging Incorporated, a healthcare technology company focused on dementia, and was awarded the Arizona Innovation Challenge as well as the PBJ 40 Under 40 in 2016. She has served as an instructor of entrepreneurship at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University for 9 years, where she also launched the Center for Entrepreneurship in 2014. Ms. Peck is an advocate for the health of women, leading FemTech initiatives in Arizona and beyond, and for children and families in the foster care system and aging populations. She believes strongly in access to housing, healthcare, and human connection. Wow. Welcome, Sidnee.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
What an incredible intro. And, it's Women's March for Mental Wellness. I am so excited to be getting under the hood with you today. So let's get going.
Awesome. I'm excited.
So I love this question because we're all such unique individuals. And I'm really curious. I mean, you've done so many different things in the the wellness space. What was that inflection point that took your life on that journey?
Yeah, I think I look at it more like I was building a layer cake. There wasn't just one single inflection point. I think this might be true for a lot of us, but three of those layers that have come to be true for me. The first was that when I was in my 20s, my father was diagnosed with young onset dementia. And I watched my mom and I supported her as primary caregiver through the dementia process. So if anyone has ever had a family member go through the dementia process, you can relate. It's long and grueling and importantly, lonely. And that will ring true later in the third inflection point. So that happened. I started exploring, educating myself, and as you heard in my bio, then started exploring age tech. The second layer on that was I became a foster parent in 2020 and had the experience of having someone else's child in my home and providing the best loving care that I could for that child in that moment, but really understanding what it meant for that child to be in the system and how many points of trauma occurred, not only the initial trauma that pulled them from the home, but how many points of trauma occurred after that, and why the foster care system and the things that are attached to it, such as homelessness and incarceration, are a cyclical process. And then the third layer on that is I moved to a new city on my own in Northern California for a year. And as someone who was highly social, always connected, actually tried to push away, more of an introvert, push away and be alone, I was really lonely. And so for the first time, I had that glimpse into loneliness. And so all of this kind of came together in various levels of research and curiosity into exploring what intergenerational communities are, what they look like, and what the benefits are. And I think it's all these different experiences in my life that kind of led me here. And I see layers continue to happen every single day. But everything tends to point back to building this intergenerational community.
Wow. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think, that personal experience, it's all personal. Let's just be honest. It's all personal. But witnessing your father and being the caregiver and that entire experience, there's so much from a mental capacity to have to deal with that. Combine that with becoming a foster parent and dealing with the complexities of the system and everything in between. That's like multi-layers within the layer. And then lastly, moving and finding and recognizing that loneliness is a factor that doesn't discriminate. I think it's really interesting that there's the intersection that got you into intergenerational communities. So I think it's great to sort of go on. I don't know if you want to break down and talk about your experience, first as a caregiver and dealing with a father and at such a young age. Maybe you start there and take us on that journey, and then we can talk a little more about that and move forward into the next part of the layer, because I think you summing it up that way gives us a really good point in which to have our conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's unique. So there are very few people who have young onset dementia, and as a result, there are very few adults like me who are in our 20s when we're losing a parent. And oh gosh, there's so many layers that I've probably packed up and put away. But um, man, the ambiguous loss and the daily new version of grief that happens with dementia, any neurological, I think maybe it happens with physical loss as well. I'm not as familiar with that, but my dad became a different person. And so I mourned the loss of my dad that I grew up knowing. And then every day he would change. And it can be pretty extreme that every time I would see him, he was a different person. And so there's a lot of grief involved in that process. And what's interesting about age-related disease, nobody wants to talk about it. And I don't want to say that any condition is a better condition to have than others, but a disease that feels like you can win it or you can come out the other side, people will talk to you about it. They'll get excited, they'll cheer for you, they'll raise money, they'll do all of that. Dementia, everybody's afraid that it's going to happen to them. And there is, quite frankly, today, there is no other side. There's no beautiful win at the end of dementia. It is the slow decline and then the loss of life. And so no one would talk, no one knew how to talk to me about it. No one understood when I was talking about it. People in our lives, my mom and I would slowly start to disappear because they didn't know how to be around him. And you can't blame people because it's awkward. We don't talk about it. They don't know. And so it's just layers and layers of grief that happen over time. I find myself to be a pretty, I don't know if this is a thing, but I'm a healthy griever for whatever reason. If you're into astrology, maybe that comes with being Aquarius, but there are elements of I handle loss very well, and I'm grateful for that. And when I went through this process and I recognized that, I thought, oh, I can show up for other people who are going through this grief process as well. And since then, it's usually women, a lot of women have reached out to me when they or a friend have a parent diagnosed with a form of dementia. And I spend a lot of time in conversation about this and how to process it. And frankly, how to enjoy the weird silliness that comes from one losing their mind and not get caught up in all the negative and the hard parts about it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, first of all, I think it's amazing. I think it is part your sign. I have a cousin whose mother has dementia, and I actually was just up there visiting them for dinner Sunday night with my son, and my auntie showed up in her home in her phone mink with her little black pocketbook, and at the door, and I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "Oh, I'm just coming." So my uncle said that she wakes up in the morning and puts that on. She's always ready to go. And so it was like seeing a whole new, I haven't seen her in like 6 weeks, a very different person. So that very much resonates. But I think what speaks to me is your ability to grieve in a positive way And I was having that conversation. So I get that, hey, I'm just grieving her, but I'm savoring the time I have with her now. And she's so funny. And so, yeah, but that's a lot when you're in your 20s to carry. That's a lot. So, in a way, you probably were born an old wise woman. You know what I mean? To be able to be that capable of dealing with that. And so as you experienced that in your 20s and you went on, later, I guess, into this, well, first of all, did you take that into the work you were doing at the time, or is it now later, 15 years later or so, that you're able to apply a lot of these experiences into the work you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a lot of years, I couldn't think about it. So work was more of a distraction, a welcome distraction. And so that was good. When we got near the end, so in 2016 is when I joined as CEO of Smart Brain Aging, which was a clinical neuropsychologist who had been providing dementia therapies in-house, like in a clinic setting, and he wanted to be able to provide them online. And so he recruited me because of my time and my experience. And we launched an Aging 2.0 chapter in Arizona and really built a lot of stuff around age tech. And I poured myself into it. I mean, that's, I think, in my nature is I take my grief and I pour it into what can be impact. And so, yeah, so I ran that company for a year. In the end, it wasn't a good co-founder fit between the founder and I, but it was a great experience for me to learn and understand that space and recognize how much, like really have it in my face, how much as a country we devalue seniors or older generations. I think we're trying to revamp some different terms here, but older generations are not valued and revered like they are in other cultures. We've gone away from the intergenerational living, and so a lot of that became like just bright in front of my face. So I saw it both professionally, and then I kind of carried that with me.
First of all, I think it's amazing that you connected those dots and were able to go and do that for that company because in a way, it allows you to kind of close the chapter on that while doing something good on behalf of what you just experienced. So that's fantastic. I'm curious, as you moved into then the foster situation, because it's just, you have broad shoulders. So so because I think this is about your wellness and the way you approach life and taking on others' mental health and wellness.
Yeah, yeah. Some might be asking, why would you go after more loss? Because the foster care system, if it's working, actually should result in loss for the foster parents. Um, people ask me this all the time. I have no idea why. Ever since I was a teenager, I've wanted to be a foster parent, and because I th have thrown myself so much into work, it was never quote unquote the right time to do something like that because it is a significant time investment to take in a new child with trauma. But I found myself in the right position. I was in a chief of staff role, which meant that I had one direct report, which was the CEO, and I had nobody else that I had to answer to. And so it was a great time, and he understood my draw to it. And so I got into it. And again, the intent was not to adopt. The intent was truly to serve as a foster parent for a period of time while a child needed me. And I think I was just leaning into what I recognized as I was getting older, I recognized I have this natural strength of processing grief. And so if I can put myself in a position, one of the best things for young people in the foster care system is to have an experience of healthy attachment. And in order for there to be healthy attachment, the adult needs to attach as well. And so I knew I could do it. And so I leaned into it and I did it. And I don't, I can't explain it more than that. It just is in my soul. And I did not expect to then put together more pieces after seeing the foster care system. I was doing it on a personal level. I also, desired the opportunity to parent because it did not occur in my life to have my own biological children. And so I got the opportunity to parent, and selfishly, that was amazing. But then I saw so I will say it was a benefit. It was tough and a benefit to my own mental health because having someone with trauma in your home and trauma that you weren't there to see, so you don't understand, is very trying on one's mental health. But it was really powerful for me I started developing tools. I mean, they support you through the system, right? And they give you all these tools and trainings and things. And I started to understand trauma and the brain and the way behaviors as they look on the outside, both from children and adults throughout our lives, right? If someone's mean to you, if someone flips you off in traffic, if someone, all these different things, it really drove home for me. There's a longer tail there. There's a root where that pain is coming from. And it allowed me to have even more compassion and understanding as I navigate the world and recognize that all of us have different layers of trauma. Likely, many of us have different layers of trauma. And it displays differently. And if we all just think about where somebody might be coming from when we see their actions, um, might be a more loving place. So I think in the end, it really benefited my mental health.
No, that's wonderful. And I admire the connection of the healthy grieving, but I'm really curious as the connection to it relating to trauma. Is it grieving trauma? And particularly as a foster parent being put in that position where you could really impact one-on-one someone's life in a very meaningful way. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that hit home the most was I went to a trauma training as a part of keeping my foster license. And a data point that stuck with me is that if a child, I think this applies to under age 7, but if a child has a year of healthy attachment and a loving relationship with an adult, that physically creates a pathway in the brain so they can recognize a loving adult relationship. And what that translated for me was, okay, if this little girl who's in my home as she's 4 can build that neural pathway so that when she's 22, she could maybe be in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend or whomever that is loving. And if it's not, she might recognize that because her brain actually has the path to know what love looks like. And so once I heard that, I was like, okay, I'm in, I'll do this, 100 times over to give a young person that year. I don't know the data on over 7, but I imagine there's still some power there. But just that, I love learning the stuff about the actual physical stuff that's happening in the brain. It's the same with the dementia stuff. When you have social engagement and when you have new learning, you're building new neural pathways in the brain. And so all of this, it all just comes back together to community, yeah, and love.
I love that. And I think interesting to the third point, your third layer, you talked about loneliness and isolation and all of that. So if we're connecting the three, how would you connect it?
Yeah, I think loneliness and isolation maybe wasn't a topic any of us really thought much about, or we had such a negative attachment to before COVID, because it was like, oh, that person over there who's lonely. It was the typical story. And then we all had an opportunity to be isolated in a unique way during COVID. And we all had the opportunity, even if people were around us, to feel a sense of loneliness because we were not given access to some of the things we love and enjoy and whatever. And so for me, this was just another state of mental health and in being in one's own system. And I noticed that like the through line from dementia to foster to me being on my own was that at the center of all this that can improve every situation is this human connection. When I would sit with my dad and have a conversation, or when a stranger would bother to look him in the eye and smile at him or say something, it doesn't matter what crazy stuff is happening in the brain regarding memory or function. You see a smile. Now, I'm not a neurologist, so I might be a little scientifically wrong on this, but in my experience watching it, you see a smile or warmth from another human, that's going to resonate with someone no matter what's happened in their brain. And this I saw in foster care, and I saw with myself that living on my own, newly out of a relationship, working remotely. So I literally could have sat in my living room 24 hours a day and no one would have known, right? That when I would go out in public and someone would bother to have a conversation with me, that mattered. And so all these pieces that come together, this human connection, and I think, we layer the intergenerational on it because we see we get out of our own echo chamber and we get to have different kind of conversations. It brings us new perspective. In fact, a report that Generations United put out in the last couple of years showed improved cognitive ability, improved self-worth, purpose, self-confidence, obviously reduce loneliness, all of these things across all age groups. when you're in intergenerational community. And there are just unique things that happen. You look at Gen Z, and maybe the protocol way of communicating is through a device. Okay, so amongst their peers, that's what's going to be happening. But you're not going to text your grandpa or the elderly neighbor or whatever. You're going to look face to face and you're going to say at least a word or a couple of words to that person. That interaction changes the brain, it changes the heart, right? And so all of these things just, to me, all the lines go back to human connection and spending that time acknowledging each other and having compassion for each other and empathy and interest. Like, people across generations are so interesting outside of our own, right? Because it's a different life. None of us, we didn't experience growing up in our generation. And so, oh, there's just, I could go on for hours. I'll stop. It's just so beautiful.
It is beautiful. And our Under the Sisterhood is an intergenerational company. We've interviewed young women at 11 and 12, all the way up to 88.
I
And
love
it's
it.
really important to us that every single woman and ally feels recognized, feels seen, heard, and celebrated. So everything you're saying, I'm just sitting here, I'm like, yes, yes. It's so resonant, but it's so important. And I think what's happened, and I too worked in age tech, and did an initiative called Aging with Attitude. And I think what's interesting is the lack of understanding that the connections that happen between generations are where the magic lie. And so you're right in terms of the heart expanding, all of that, on a human level, the magnificence of that, but separate of that, the ideas, the institutional knowledge, the lived experiences and everything. So I'd love to, because I think that you've lived a fascinating journey and you're so young when you think about it. I'd love to talk about how you got into, it makes sense now how you got into the intergenerational housing, but if you could share what you're doing with Heirloom Collective, because I think it's amazing.
Sure. Yeah. So after my foster daughter was adopted by her grandmother, I decided to dig in and ask the question, how can my skills, so my skills are in business operations and building new things, how can my skills be helpful here? And honestly, Elizabeth, I knocked on a lot of doors with a lot of rejection of like, unless you run for governor or you decide to take some public office or take a ridiculously low paying social service job and work your way, like, good luck, lady. Like, you're not going to change or fix any of this. And so I had to sit in that for a while, which actually, that's a new skill in the last couple of years, is learned patience. And as I sat in it and I reflected and I gave my brain space to like connect the dots subconsciously, the intergenerational thing kept knocking, and prevention kept knocking. So we are a society of take a pill and make it go away. We love interventions. We're not so much fans. I mean, we're trying to change, but so much fans of putting the work in to do the preventative work. And everything pointed to, if you want to fix foster care in America, you need to do things that eliminate the need for foster care in America. And that is healing families before they have to give up their children. So how do you do that? Well, you go back to the root of where some of this happens, and there's a particularly important group, which is those individuals who turn 18 when the foster care system and have not been they don't have permanency, as they call it. So they don't have a family that they're entering into. Literally, it's their 18th birthday, and it's like, bye-bye, go figure out how to be an adult and live on your own and find housing and a job. And could you imagine? I mean, when I was 18, I had probably, 7 different people keeping me on my toes. And so they're all alone. And that puts them at risk to enter into some of these systems of being unhoused, making choices that put them in a position to be incarcerated, or having children young and when they're not financially ready to, and then having to re-enter the foster care system as parents. So to stop this cycle, these individuals need time and space to heal and an opportunity to feel purpose and path, dignity and agency. And unfortunately, while a lot of good social service work is done out of necessity and like pragmatism, it doesn't always go to the healing part. It's how do we get you food? How do we get you a job? How do we get you a house? But you're still going to enter that cycle, right? If you don't heal the thing, you go back in. And so it all came, I visited an organization called Pivot out of Oklahoma City. I visited Bridge Meadows out of Portland, and I saw these great things happening, and I took my own spin on it. And I met with a gentleman out of an affiliate of Catholic Charities called Housing for Hope, and he builds tons of units for different populations to support them through the housing process. And I said, can you help me? And after an hour of, this is why it's hard, this is why it's hard, this is why you shouldn't do it, this is why it's hard. And at the end, I was like, okay, cool. Sounds good. Let's do it. And he's like, okay, if you still want to do it after that, I'm with you. And so he's been incredible. His name is Steve. And he's helped me understand the housing piece because that was all brand new. But we learned in this process, the number one thing is safe and secure housing. So you got to have a place to lay your head at night and feel okay. And then you need the process and space to heal. So that's mental health support. That's access to understanding what your purpose is, all that good stuff. You need relationship. You need social network. That's where the intergenerational piece came in. And then I recognized, oh, the fastest growing group of those becoming homeless are 55 plus. And a lot of it has to do with our raising housing prices. So let's support that group as well. And then we started learning how to engage that group and all of that. So it all just kind of sort of came together. And I tell you, every conversation I have with people who are involved in this space, I just get so many cheerleaders. People are saying, like, we've always wanted to do this. There are risks in bringing these two populations together, but if there's not a risk, then why bother, I think, with some new stuff. So like, let's lean in and try and do hard things. And so we've been going, we're now, so Heirloom Collective is the organization that provides programming. It creates a space of dignity, agency, and human connection so people can choose their own path and do so in a safe and secure environment while also creating organic relationships. So this one really important nugget that we learned in this process is the mentorship program is not it. So you don't just take a senior and take an 18-year-old and say, and now here's your mentor. A lot of things can go wrong in that relationship. Instead, you lead by proximity and you create opportunities for organic relationship creation. You put them in the same place. You let them show up on Tuesday nights at, taco dinner or whatever at the same time every week. And slowly they choose. So that's part of the agency. They choose to build that relationship. They connect with who they want to connect with. And now both groups start to build out these human connections, these social networks, and these support systems that they didn't have when they were on their own.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And I think what really struck me, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the role modeling, and it's like, no, if it's organic, it's happening in the moment. So it's, it's about each individual. It's almost like micro moments of interaction that will connect them or not. And so by creating those scenarios, those opportunities, that's really special. And so over time, when you build the communities and the people come into the communities, you can see the role modeling coming from both sides. And I think what I think is very interesting about it is you have the more seasoned, the seniors, if you will, not seniors just age-wise, but the more seasoned people with more lived experiences who can role model, that builds their esteem, that keeps them feeling worthy and valued. And then you have the younger people being able to support and have these dialogues and feel that safety and security, as well as have the opportunity to interact and engage on levels that they wouldn't have imagined. And so it's like there's so much, I use the word magic a couple of times, but there's a lot of magic in that. And I know that just from like all of the research I've been part of with the organizations I've been part of bringing those two generations. But what I think is particularly interesting as well is your comment around the risk. There's probably a lot more to gain than a lot more risk, because back to your comment all along is the human connection, that human bond, those human bonds that form are much more important than what isn't, if you will. Even though, to your point of that trauma, they're still dealing with the trauma, the healing. And I'm kind of curious as I'm thinking this through, talk about the healing process that sort of comes in these organic, relationships that are forming.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of that jury's out. We got to watch and see. And everybody's healing journey is different, but the opportunities that are there are more. So there's the element of structure, which is allowing and encouraging the connection of a behavioral health specialist for those who need particular types of counseling. But you nailed it. It's purpose and self-worth. And when you can see that by your interaction with another person. So if you have, John comes out and he's 65 and he's like, man, I'm supposed to download this app and I don't know it works. And here comes Sarah and she's like, oh, you need help with that, John? And okay, that's a micro moment. You nailed it. A micro moment of purpose. Oh, I'm valuable. I am valuable to this person in this moment. And that stores, right? That's a layer in the brain. And then vice versa, Sarah, I'm being very stereotypical here, but Sarah gets a flat tire and she's like, well, shoot, no one ever taught me how to change a tire. And John's like, I've changed a lot of tires. Let me help you. Let me show you. Let me teach you. That's a micro moment for John, for both, right? The feeling of being, there's someone I can go to and I can be supported. That's important. And then I have purpose and people need me, and that's important. And it keeps happening in these moments. And I think they'll get bigger and deeper the more those relationships build. But in the beginning, they can just be these little tiny things that just happen naturally. And I think it's so hard. You can't craft this very easily into large, social services programs, but these are the things that are the unlock. Because then if I show up tomorrow confident with purpose, I'm going to do better in my interview that I'm really, really scared for. Or I might raise my hand in class if I've decided to go to community college, right? I might speak up. I might ask someone on a date. I might, all these little things that start to happen when we start to feel like we're human and we live in that dignity and that agency. And so, I mean, I get the chills thinking about it, like just the opportunity for all these little moments that some of us get to experience day in and day out, and we don't actually recognize that they're happening. But for people who are all alone, and I mean, these individuals are often very much all alone. They don't have those moments. And so I just cannot wait for the site to be built so that people can start experiencing these things.
I can't wait for you either. It sounds wonderful. And I just, it's hard in a lot of ways not having gone down that road and experienced that, but I think a lot about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and being in the safety and security and the self-actualization. And it's like, I forget the layer in between. Of course, I know the base level, but it's really about connecting the two. If you think about it, the purpose is up at the top, and the safety and security, we all need to know we have a safe place to live and feel comfortable with, but giving them a sense of purpose. And I think back to your word agency is really, it's not only important, but that's really where the fodder lie, if you will, and the moments. And so I love the fact that you've identified something, and I think that you'd be surprised at the ripple effect if it, once it gets going.
Yeah, that's I have to present this to, or I get to present this to cities and organizations where we're asking for support and guidance. And one of the things that I've tried to put numbers to, but we don't know. I just think they're going to be huge, is the economic impact on communities when one person becomes self-reliant versus going back into the system, right? When one person does, then that means there are children that get birthed later, right? When they are financially able to do it and they have the support system to do it. And then that individual works in some form or fashion, they pay taxes and they give back into their communities instead of taking from, which not that they wanted to be taking from, but they would be if they're in the system. And then their children are modeled that behavior and set up for success and get an education and get to go through that. And then that's generational. And now you've just broken the generational cycle. And the value of that to community, for people who just care about economics. I'm here all day for people who just are looking at the cost of this stuff. That alone is a selling point. Take away all the beautiful human stuff and the way we interact in our communities, but the cost impact of the generational ripple effect. And you're right, Generations United, I will plug again, in their report said benefits from intergenerational community flow over into their surrounding community and the staff that work there. So now someone who comes on site is taking that home to their family, to their community, and all of this, it just continues to ripple. Um, so yeah, I think a small, so we build intimate communities on purpose because we think human connection needs intimacy of under 30 or 40 units. And a lot of people in housing don't like that. But I believe that these small communities, not only can we build multiple of them, but they have such an effect that goes on and is so much bigger than we really think about. If we and I'm going to say this, I don't want to discount this important shelter work, but just putting someone in housing to make sure they have a roof over their head does achieve something, and it achieves something important. If it doesn't help them heal, we just don't have that ripple effect, and they have the chance to re-enter into other systems later, right? And so putting a value on that longevity of the healing and the impact of that, I think there's a lot of work and research to be done, but I'm excited and look forward to being part of that data set.
Well, you should be excited. As I'm hearing you talk, I'm picturing this in all these underserved communities throughout the country. So imagine you could go into every city that has both, the system, if you will. Yeah, I'm really touched by that, and I think the ripple effect of smaller communities and when designed well, the ripple effect outwards into the community, it's just good all around. It makes people, there's just so much goodwill coming out of it,
Mhm.
separate of all the healing. And I go back to I'm just like putting all the stringing your story together. You couldn't have put it better in terms of the intergenerational ramifications. By sort of stopping the intergenerational repeat of cycling the system, if you will. So you're stopping that, then you're creating a new way to look at intergenerational, less about trauma and about healing or healed. So you heal this group, and then the next generation doesn't come in. Well, they come in with the trauma if we think about the intergenerational trauma, but you know what I mean. It's less overt in their daily lives. It's something that's more subliminal, and I think you can work with that. But this is really rich territory, really rich and special territory. I'd like to know because you've shared so much of your story, and it's really wonderful. And of course, you've accomplished so much more. I'd like to know how you feel you're marching for mental wellness, Sid.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. Part of it, and I don't know if this is a little bit cheesy, but part of it is just how I show up in the world, I think is really important. So again, back to human connection, I think every one-on-one interaction does actually have a ripple effect, right? When you are kind to someone at the coffee shop, they take that kindness to the next person they interact with. And I'm a huge believer in that. So I think the way I live and operate in the world is an important way that I march for women's mental wellness. I also just hope to build so many of these communities. There is a big dream. It's still in very early stages of development, but there is a big dream to build more versions of Heirloom Collective properties that span lots of different groups of people. And so creating the space, especially, if there's an opportunity where there's, women-centric living scenarios and all that, there's all kinds of fun fair housing laws stuff all, sprinkled in there. But the opportunity to help women live together intergenerationally, I think is big on my list over the next 10 years. And importantly, I want to help women find their own path and their own joy, like stepping into their purpose, however big or small. And we use this word purpose. Again, it doesn't have to be like changing the world, running for president, any of those, your purpose can be being kind when you're out in the world, or it can span lots of different visible sizes. But helping women on that journey and standing up for that when I see things happening around me. Um, I chose to not live life by societal norms, and I take it as a part of my journey to be visibly and audibly showing and telling that that's okay for other women as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. I'm curious when you say that you chose to live out of societal norms, which I love, by the way. How would you define that?
Yeah, so I think it's changing, which is amazing. But for my generation and my time coming of age, and still a lot of this, the things women were congratulated for were getting married and having children. I did neither of those things. And I wasn't ever drawn to do either. There were times where I thought I might, and I think because I thought I should or I was supposed to, but I didn't. And what happened along the way is that I've had beautiful romantic relationships, multiple over my years of dating life that have taught me so much. All the different people that I've had the opportunity to date and become very close with and become family with, frankly, and that were represented a season in my life. It also created space. So I've also had the opportunity to be in a parental role over other people's children, which has brought me a lot of joy as well. And the space of not having my own children and not, frankly, I'll just speak in a very straightforward way. I haven't really had to sacrifice my dreams for another adult or for other children. And so as a result, I've gotten to build a big, beautiful career and do really things that are really important to me, that I'm passionate about, that I hope will have a big impact, without feeling like I was sacrificing something in a relationship or, and I want to recognize the importance of being a mom and a wife and how that giving of yourself to other humans, how beautiful and important that is. That just was not the path that my life took or hasn't so far. And I'm in my early 40s. So, who knows? But it just created space. And but I will tell you, the number of parties, networking events, meetings, professional to personal along the spectrum, things that I show up to. I'll say something my grandma would say. If I had $1 for every time someone said, "Are you married? Do you have kids?" within the first minute of meeting me, I would be very, very rich. And so I'd like to shift that. And it's hard. Like I stand strong in the choices I've made, and I'm so grateful for this big, beautiful life that I have. And I would love for society to stop asking those questions of women. And I think we're getting closer. We're warming up to that. But that's not where, even if we do those two things, amazing. That's not what our value is, right? We bring so much, as every human brings so much as a part of our human, to the conversation, to the table. And so let's not lead with, "Are you married? Do you have kids?" as the two most important things that a woman can do with her time.
I'm sitting here right now in utter goosebumps. And I'm recalling myself at 21 having left art school. I'm never getting married, never have a child. I mean, how many years later, well, divorced and 3 children, beautiful children. But it's interesting. I think I really, really respect and admire your courage to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to live my life based on societal norms or standards. And I think it's really important to give voice to women, that there is no one thing that defines us. I was having another conversation with an attorney, wonderful woman, and she said, "Yes, I'm an attorney, I'm a this, I'm a this." She says, "But that is what I do. That is not who I am." And I think that that is what you're getting at. It's like,
Yes.
I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, an executive, I'm a COO, like I'm all these things, but that's what I do. That's, who am I? And I think that's the interesting space that women, taking the time, to your point of having the space to really understand who you are, to create that big, beautiful life. And it's different for everyone.
Absolutely.
It means different things to different people. So thank you for sharing that. That's really, I think it's a very important message, because I think that this is about belonging regardless. This isn't about, belonging in judgment. It's about creating a space where all people are seen for who they are and the way they show up. And I love the fact that throughout this conversation, Sid, you've said it's the way I get to show up. Because I think that we as women don't really, when we think about it in those terms, how are you showing up? How are you able to show up?
Mhm.
All these different circumstances, and you've had many different life situations that forced you to show up with your father and what have you. And then those experiences led to being able to show up in different ways. And so I really applaud that and appreciate you sharing that. We could go on forever. I'm fascinated with this conversation. The intergenerational stuff gets to my heart in a very deep way. I'm very connected in so many ways to younger and older and every age in between. But today, this is your platform to give a message to women of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. What do you want to leave them with, Sidnee?
Such a big question. And first of all, thank you, Elizabeth, for making the time and space to speak about the intergenerational communities and impact and element. Obviously, I find it very important as well. You know, for the tagline I want to say is be you, but that's a little cliche. What I want to get to is maybe you do want to show up in this world exactly as these expectations. Maybe you do want to be a beautiful wife and a doting mother and you want to keep a beautiful home and you want to stay home and that is your jam. Or maybe you want to be a wandering traveler and never attach and never call a city your city and be a citizen of the world and anything in between. And I think my message to women, which frankly is my message to humans, because I think, I value and cherish conversation about women. And I think there's also a lot of the stuff that applies just the same to our male counterparts, but is to just live in the world true to yourself. And it's so easy to say and so hard to do because, first of all, it takes this whole long journey to figure out who we are. I don't know that we ever really figure it out. We figure it out at a season at a time. But then to show up that way, and especially, in this time where maybe showing up in certain ways gets ridiculed or is, you even have laws against something, all the ugly messiness, but the time, space, and courage to show up as you are and do things that bring you joy. Again, if like being home, reading a book and having a cup of tea is your joyful weekend, don't feel like you're supposed to go out and have an Instagram photo with 20 friends at brunch, right? And vice versa, right? Like whatever. I just would invite women and humans just to live in your true self and to show up. And gosh, life is so short. If there's one thing my experience with my dad taught me is that death does not discriminate. Newsflash, we're all going to die and we don't know when. And if we could just show up every day living and doing things that bring us joy in the way that we care about and not for what other people think, that would be my message to women and to all humans. And if we can do it in kindness to others and other generations, then I think that's even better.
Well, just to add to that, the world would be a better place. So, wow, that's a really powerful. I love be true to yourself. And, I'm all about authenticity, living your authentic life. And so thank you so much, Sid. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for getting under the hood with me today and sharing your incredible life journey. And I just want to call out again what you're doing with Heirloom Collective, the intergenerational work. Intergenerational healing has so much power to transform our planet. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for creating this space for women to tell these stories.
Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer. Her song, Rose.